say, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And sometimes you fight for your limitations. And that's one of the biggest challenges actually in therapy, is often patients will fight for their limitations. And I'm like, do you want to be right, or would you rather break free of your limitations? Because if you fight for them, you get to keep them. And you actually don't want to keep them. You want to be free of them. But we are drawn to what's familiar and what we know. And having to let go of that opens us into this unknown realm.
It's very frightening.
Scary. So you just, I don't really like this, but at least I know how it goes. So you hang on to that, because now what? I'm just drifting in nothingness. But if you can reframe that, instead of this unknown that's scary, it's the unpredictable unknown, you rather see it as pure possibilities. It's like a blank canvas. You can paint anything on it, or you could see it as a white blank wall and you have no clue what to do next.
I think this is going to be a pretty exciting conversation. I'm very excited to have you.
Thank you.
On the podcast.
Me too.
Yeah. Dominique Manias, the clinical psychologist, author, dancer, mom of a little soccer team.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. Really appreciate being here. Super excited and interested to see where this goes.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what drew you to your profession. Did you always know this is what you were going to be?
As a psychologist, yeah. I think I've always been interested in health, and initially I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor because I was watching too much ER as a kid and enjoyed that. But there was something off about it. It didn't totally hit the spot. But I think since I was little, I've always been talking to people. I mean, I remember going to America on a holiday as a child, and I had happened to sit next to a stranger, and by the end of the trip I knew this person's entire life story. So I think since small I've just always been drawn to hearing people's stories and having the compassion and empathy and being with them through their journey. So I've always loved it. It's the most natural thing to me. I think if I was stranded on an island I would end up doing it. So it's not something that, it's like thought out. It just oozes out because I love to. So it doesn't even feel like work to me. And I say that to my kids every day. I'm not going to work. I just get to do what I love to do. Yeah.
Did you find when you were growing up that by having conversations with people, you were in the background analyzing in some way?
I was. I'm always drawn to even those type of books as a child. I remember my parents had these 4 books, a series of the mind. And at the back of each book there was assessments like, are you a risk taker? Are you this? Are you that? So I was always trying to understand myself better. And obviously when you're trying to understand yourself better, you're analyzing or observing people a lot closer, because you're trying to, the mind has always intrigued me. How people think, why people do what they do has always intrigued me. So I've always been drawn to that.
Do you find that when you speak to people, they have the perception that you're analyzing everything that they say, and do you feel they put a guard up, or?
I think initially, there is a little bit of that when they first hear that I'm a psychologist. Sometimes there's an awkward where they'll say something like, are you trying to read my mind? Or whatever. But I think I don't come across with an agenda, and I think people feel that. I come across really just with an open heart. I'm not trying to catch anyone out or look into their heads or anything. I just come with such an open heart, with no agenda, no ulterior motive. And I think because people feel that, they feel the love that it comes with. So they don't close up, because you don't close up to love.
Yeah. With the psychoanalysis and the 2 main schools, with Freudian and Jungian, how do you find that impacts your work?
Look, at university you study all the various modalities and depth and so forth. I think you evolve I'm always studying. I'm always reading and studying in the background. And for me, it's a collaborative approach of taking everything that's been said and putting it together. I don't believe in sort of pigeonholing things and separating, because to me it's all one at the end anyway. So I have a very broad mind of looking at things, and I think every forerunner or previous master, or whatever you want to say, has contributed something valuable. And I think it's this and that, the theory of this and that there's something relevant in many of them, and I put it all together, and then I've got to also go with what I feel that comes to me.
It feels like there must also have been many more developments in psychoanalysis since then. So should we not also be evolving into newer thought patterns?
I think it's gone more from in the back, even if you look at how 20-something years ago when I studied, it was all about sort of the mind and things like that. And it's moving more from that to the heart-centered approach. It's a more spiritual approach where it wasn't even spoken about at university in those days. Like, you just didn't even go there. You were, in fact, taught not to bring anything spiritual into the conversation because it's taboo, you know?
Yeah.
So it was a very analytical, scientific sort of approach. And now it's bringing those two worlds together, I think. It's science and spirituality all together. And I think that's when you hit the sweet spot.
It's a more holistic
It's mind and
approach.
Head and heart together finds the balance.
Yeah, I think maybe Jung hinted at it with collective consciousness in some way, but maybe it's a little more, less clinical now.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
For the clinical psychologist.
Exactly. So you can imagine, as it's evolving, if you don't keep studying and really broaden the barriers or frontiers of where you won't keep up with how humanity at large is evolving. So you really do have to keep expanding your mind in terms of how you look at people and how you approach people and how you deal with people, because humanity itself is changing. You know, so you can't just go with a clinical centered scientific approach because you'll lose people.
Do you feel that patients maybe have preconceived ideas of what clinical psychology is and maybe create some kind of barrier to approaching therapy?
Definitely. I think it's come a long way. I think the stigma is definitely less, you know, but I do think still at large people are a little bit nervous because they come with this notion that if I'm seeing a clinical psychologist, I must be broken and there's something wrong with me. And you don't want to feel broken. You don't want to feel that there's something wrong. So even if you're suffering, you'll suffer in silence rather than going and getting the support or the help or the guidance, which is so unnecessary, because my stance is nobody's broken, actually. And if we could afford it, everybody should have a psychologist. I think that would be the healthiest thing, because a picture can't see itself from within a frame, if you think of a picture. And sometimes all that's required is you to step out of the frame. And that's kind of what I offer. I'm that soundboard that I'm helping someone see themselves from the outside in. And sometimes you just need that different perspective to change or reframe the way you're looking at something. So I'm not there to be anybody's guru. I'm really there just to help people find their own guru within them. So I'm really just a guiding force that just shines a light in a particular direction and kind of encourages people towards their own light. So I think if you start seeing it in that way, that you're not broken and you just maybe need to reframe the way you're looking at things or let go of certain things you've been carrying, then it shouldn't be a stigma. It should be something that's welcomed in terms of health.
And how does therapy provide healing from that sense, from the conventional sense, talking to people? Is it something that you help them realize from within, or you give them direction?
I think it's a little bit of both, but fundamentally you're raising the awareness. Is often you don't know what you don't know sometimes. So when your awareness is raised, and that's what the conversations about, is that we really get into the nitty-gritties of things and raise awareness of blind spots that you may not have seen, or highlighting things that you don't want to look at, that maybe your intuition's been hinting all along but you're choosing not to look at it. So the awareness itself does the healing, but then there are obviously some practical steps and strategies and things that you can employ to get closer and closer to that place within you, but you've had it all along. So the tools are not really the answer. The tools are just, you know, exactly that, a tool to help you get to that center, but it's not like the tools gave you it. You had it all along. It's just helping you get there.
And do you have instances where while you're trying to develop this self-awareness in patients, that they don't want to do the work and become self-aware and don't really want to look inside? Can that be frustrating?
I don't find it frustrating at all. It definitely is possible. There are people that are just not ready, and it's absolutely fine, because I see it as some people are not ready to start running or whatever. They're just needing a period of time of support. And that's
Okay.
also okay, because the way I see it is like a series of development. Imagine you get a baby that's crawling, and then a toddler walks, and then an adult runs. If someone is still at the crawling stage, I'm not frustrated that they're not running yet, because you don't get cross with a baby that it's crawling and saying, but you should be able to run. Running's great. You just accept that that's where they're at right now, and when they're ready, they'll start walking.
Okay. So it's not outcome driven, and you detach from an outcome with...
Exactly, and it's not about me. So it's not about me needing them to be at a particular place. It's always about them and where they at. So it's about me meeting you where you're at. So it would only be frustrating if it was about me and I'm trying to get you somewhere. But if it's me meeting you where you at, I'm totally comfortable where you at, because it doesn't reflect anything about me. I'm supporting you where you at.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. There are a lot of hot topics these days. Everybody's, I think with social media and with the internet, everybody's become an expert on, I think, pop psychology. So I thought, let's talk about some of these. It's almost everywhere that people are talking about narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder and narcissistic traits. So almost everyone is labeled as narcissistic in some way. So how do you differentiate and identify the real problems?
You're not really going to like the answer, but the way I see it is, I don't like, although I'm a clinical psychologist and it's all about, really is diagnostic based and clinically assessing and giving, basically labeling people in terms of diagnoses. But I really don't like that. I don't like pigeonholing people and slapping a label, a narcissist or this or that, because I don't see people like that. It's just not my view. My view is we're all fundamentally energy, and it's like, imagine all the colors of a rainbow, you know what I mean, is that we have all of it. So even this narcissist that we see, some people, we all have a narcissistic side to us and an angelic whatever kind of side to us. We all of it. It's just some people have sort of got that more intensely, that color's brighter in their rainbow, if you want to say that one's highlighted. So because I see that everybody has everything, to me there's no need. It's just if it's accentuated, in other words, if it's disproportionate to the rainbow, there's a reason that color is refracting more. Do you understand? So if narcissistic traits are highlighted, there's a reason, there's a fear underneath that's causing that person to behave in a manner that's the opposite of love, or whatever you want to call it. So for me, it doesn't freak me out. It's just, okay, I wonder what's got that person. Just like when the sky changes color, there's a reason, because there's more water droplets and it's refracting the light, and that's why it's more green, because it's going to hail or whatever. So if the person is become a little bit extra in that way, there's underlying reason, and when nature always seeks balance. So fundamentally, it's nature's looking to balance itself. So I'm looking at it always as, how can you balance this person? It's just it's a human out of balance. That's all.
Yeah, I think that applies to so many circumstances where nature is always seeking balance. Yeah. It's always seeking a degree of equilibrium, and it can happen in a way that you may not like, and it can force you into equilibrium.
Exactly.
At some stage. Okay. Trauma bonds and love.
Yeah.
There's information out there that suggests that people that are experiencing trauma bonds can't distinguish between trauma bonds and love. Is this true, or is it just nonsense on the internet?
I hear you. How I look at it and how I look at relationships is that often people are coming in, like you said, with an initial trauma. So if you have to imagine like a pizza, a whole pizza, there's a slice missing. Okay, so there's a hole, if you want to say. And they're looking to fill that hole. So they are often drawn to a person that emits or represents that missing piece of pizza in them. So they're drawn to almost complete themselves. And you hear when they love bombing each other in the beginning that this person really completes me or whatever, and I just feel so whole, and they're so in love. Because they're almost taking that piece of pizza slice and inserting it into the part of them they feel is missing from once upon a time. But the second that person doesn't fill that piece, in other words, make them feel good enough or make them feel seen and heard or whatever it is, or not lovable, then they start fighting, and then there's trauma, problems in the relationship, and then they say this person's changed and not who they were, and and then they're so upset. But really, relationships, a healthy relationship is coming in whole, is that there's nothing missing, and that it's just an illusion. Nobody's missing any pieces of their pizza, if you want to call it that. And when you can recognize who you really are, and that you are coming in whole, and there's nothing you need from a person, but rather who you being in the relationship, then it's amazing. And that's why the beginning of relationships are so awesome, that honeymoon stage, is because you're so present, you're so conscious of, like, presently in that moment, taking in every little chappy paper that you ate on the first date, that you really are showing almost, you're so considerate, you're so patient, so you really are giving the highest version of yourself to that person, and so are they. But then as time goes on, it becomes more automated, and you get used to each other, and that starts to fall. By the way, your patience levels drop, you get tired, and then it feels different.
Do you think that people would benefit by slowing down during that honeymoon phase?
I don't think it's about slowing down. I think it's just about noticing. It's again bringing awareness to the moment, and noticing how they are in the relationship. That's important, because I don't think that they often take note of it. They just sort of in it, but just noticing yourself in that moment, and then start seeing if it changes, then your awareness sees what's changed. That would be important.
That might be a difficult thing to do, to try to maintain awareness when you're overwhelmed with these feelings of love and passion.
But like you said, by creating space in a way, you stay very present. So it is possible. So you're calling it slowing down, I call it space, similar thing. But if you and that goes for life in general, not just even in that. It could be in your career, it could be with your kids, it could be with a lover. The point is, if you create space, you don't lose yourself. In other words, if you're watching a movie, if you're too close to the screen, you're so in the movie, you lose yourself. But if you have a bit of space between you and the movie, you're aware of yourself watching the movie. That's a stance we should have throughout our lives all the time anyway.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. What is gaslighting?
I have my own view on it, but what angle do you mean by that?
No, I'm interested in your
but from what angle, in terms of how do you mean by?
Oh, well, it's a common term that people use. I was gaslighted, he's gaslighting me, she's gaslighting me. What do people interpret as gaslighting, and how would you view it?
Yeah, I don't really use gaslighting as a term much, so for me it's not something I have a direct experience with. You do hear people saying that a lot, and that that kind of people have set them up in some way, but in my personal life, I don't really have an experience of dealing with that much.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's become, people are talking a lot about trauma these days, and I think the definition of what we perceived as trauma has widened with people like Gabor Mate and what he considers trauma. Almost everything is a trauma to some degree. But is there a direction towards trauma-informed therapy? So
you get two, I think Gabor talks about that. There's two types of traumas. You get an external trauma, which is something that's happened, and outside trauma, that's obviously something like a car accident or whatever. And then you get internal traumas, where it's not necessarily that you would see anything happened, but the perception inside you, and that happens a lot when we're little, that it's traumatic. So it's more a perception that something is, and you have a physical response to that thing of fear or sadness or whatever. So then your link to that is always that feeling. So you carry on in your life later on, and although everything looks fine, something reminds you of that feeling, and it's as if you're having a trauma, but you're not really. So you have the reaction of a trauma where it's almost a reenactment of the past. So it's not a response that you would think matches the situation. You can't understand why the person's having such a,
You've triggered something deep that takes them back.
Exactly. So it's more about reframing that internal trauma, that's the meaning you made about the scene, than the actual scene being a problem. What happened is not necessarily the problem. It's your relationship to what happened, the perception about it, which keeps the ongoing trauma throughout their lives. Because that moment's come and gone where the trauma happened. But if people keep it alive, everybody keeps traumas alive, internal or external traumas, ongoing. There was a story about two monks, and he says they were walking along the riverbed, and they come across this lady who's freaking out and screaming, and her child was on the other side of the river, and she couldn't get across. It was too rough, so one of the monks picks her up and takes her across. And his friend, the other monk, comes with him. When they were walking further down the river, he looks at his friend, the other monk, and is like, "Why are you so upset?" He's so cross, and he couldn't understand why his friend was so cross. And then he says, "Why are you so upset?" So he says, "You touched the woman, you picked it up, we had vows, you're not supposed to lay your hands on a woman." So he says, "Funny, I put her down ages ago and you're still carrying her." And I think that's what we do, is that we carry traumas that have happened and it's not happening now, but we're living as if.
How does it help to revisit traumas in the healing process?
It's about reframing. It's about also the block is the emotion. Is that we had an emotion at the time that the trauma happened, okay? And because it was such a horrible feeling emotion, we pushed it in, we suppressed it because it didn't feel nice, okay? And we know the rule, whatever you resist persists.
Yes.
So you've literally resisted that your whole life, that feeling. And anything that triggers that feeling, you also push it down because you don't want to go there. So in order to heal that, they say it's about allowing, embrace and allow. Accept, allow, embrace, rather than resist and judge and fear. Okay, so by allowing the emotion to come up, is at the time you thought you couldn't handle it. You thought you were almost going to die. This feels so bad that you feel like you're going to die. And now, as a grown-up, you're not a child anymore. In the programming years of 0 to 7, it feels as if you're going to die in that time. But now you're not. So you've almost got to grow yourself up in that you feel that fear. So let's say it's public speaking or something, and once you did an oral at school and you thought you were going to die. The only way through it, and I say if you want to get through the crocodile water, is to go through the water and see that you made the crocodiles up in your head, is you've got to cross the water and see you don't die. So you've got to go through similar or things that now you've got to do a speech at work or something, and all that trauma is coming up of once upon a time. And you've literally got to welcome those feelings and that fear and that anxiety that's bubbling up in you, instead of pushing it down. And what we tend to do is avoid and procrastinate because we think we're going to die, is to just let it happen. Let yourself feel it and recognize that emotions are just energy in motion. It's just a frequency. It's just a feeling that bubbles up. And if you don't suppress it and just allow it, it comes and it goes. Funny enough, laughter, joy, happiness, we let that come and we go. We don't get stuck in laughter. We don't stay and enjoy laughing the whole time because we let it happen. And then it comes and it passes. But if there's a horrible feeling in our body, because it feels horrible in us, we want to push it. And if you just let yourself feel it, you've passed through it, then it's no longer a trauma to you anymore. You're able to go through other similar scenes and
you allow yourself to feel it, let the fear come, and then reframe it. Reframe it
because there's a meaning you've made about that I'm not good enough or whatever.
So shift your perspective on it, and that's part of the healing.
And place your attention on the truth.
Okay, all right, no, that makes sense. On the spectrum of I'm feeling a bit sad to depression, it's maybe a big range, and I think maybe a lot of people don't actually know where they sit. They know they're sad, maybe I'm depressed, I'm not sure. But how do you know when it's something serious? How would you define, like, clinically, clinical depression?
So I think sadness is one of a normal emotion. Everybody knows what that feels like, and that's absolutely fine. And it comes and it goes, and it's momentary. When it starts to become a clinical depression, it's something that's persistent. It's something that's starting to affect your general functioning. So you start seeing it in your ability to sleep. You're not sleeping properly, you're struggling to fall asleep, you've got insomnia, or you're sleeping too much and all you want to do is sleep. Your appetite might change, where you now have lost your appetite and eating is hard, or you feel nauseous when you eat, or you're eating too much. And it's just, you just comfort eating all the time, so excessively. then obviously just feeling overwhelmed all the time, tearfulness all the time. So crying from time to time is not a problem. Everybody cries. It's not a, but if it's persistent and it's ongoing and it's starting to affect your work, it's starting to affect your functioning, then you know. Feelings of irritability, more than just the normal little irritability. You're snapping at silly things that aren't, you know, constantly. Things that you normally find fun, that you love to do, you find you've lost interest in it. You just don't feel to do it anymore. You just and you start to withdraw. You notice people messaging you, and you just wish they wouldn't, or you're not answering your phone at all, or it's not, again, not just that one or two messages that you don't feel like, but it's persistently starting to withdraw from society, and you just find you're sort of hiding. You can start to see a picture of isolation, of darkness starting to come over a person, and that's when you do need to reach out and you need to get help, and there are things that you can do.
And do you think that things like comfort eating and the things that people engage in, is it in pursuit of dopamine?
Yes, and it's, again, yes, you're striving for that. You want a little piece of that happiness, that high, and that dopamine high, but ultimately you're just trying to get away from this feeling. So it's a moment that you're eating that donut or whatever, that you just, it's a little break.
Distraction from
it's a little
reality.
break. And that's why social media and people being lost in social media or gaming or whatever, people get, you know, even shopping becomes a thing, or substances, is they just want to break from this horrible feeling, you know, is they just want to get away from it. And it's so transient, you know, it's such a short little moment that they'll feel better for a little while, but then it's that horrible feeling plus the guilt and all the other feelings and shame that come with what I've just done. So it just compounds and compounds and compounds.
I think sometimes people with depression feel they're at the bottom of this hole and there's no way out. But if they are, for example, people watching and they feel in that space, how could you encourage them to come for therapy, to show them there is a light and there is a way out?
I think the very first thing is to recognize you're not a failure. Just because you're there and you're needing to go and get help doesn't mean you've messed up in life and now you're a disaster and you're not okay, and it doesn't mean anything about you. It just means life's got you to this point that's got a wonderful opportunity for you, and on the other side of that could be your, you know, great things. So it doesn't define you at all. It doesn't mean you're weak. Then you go and get the help, and in getting the help, who you really are can now shine. You came here to live this life and to really express yourself and be everything that you are, and to be clouded under this grey cloud is not worth it. And really it's just trying to squeeze you, to tell you however you've been thinking, however you've been, is not really true about you. So in a way, for me, inside the depression is a little gift. It's there trying to tell you, come on, you can do it. But it kind of has to usher you into a place, and that's why sometimes you need a psychologist or somebody that can point a light on areas of yourself that you're unable to recognize. And then there's if you do come for help, obviously there's a lot we can do, and we can reframe things. Might have to look at how severe the depression is. You might need pharmacological support. So for a period of time, you might need some serotonin, you know, so you might need medication. And people get nervous about that. There's so many antidepressants on the market. I'm not a massive person that loves medication at all. So I would always try and strive to do it without medication first. So that's the first step. So with exercise and eating right and talking through. But there's still a place for medication. And sometimes the depletion of the serotonin or whatever is so low that you do need help with an antidepressant. And it might just be for a short amount of time. It might also be genetic in that your family line is just, it's like that. Just like if you had low iron, you would take an iron supplement. You wouldn't just let yourself faint all the time. And you take the medication for the period of time, and then if you can come off it, you do. But if it's in your family in a sense that you need to stay on it, then you look at that.
There's something I had read about serotonin being produced in the gut, and I think gut disruption is quite a big problem because of processed foods and the modern diet. So does that also have a big impact?
Yes, well, they say your gut is your second brain. So I definitely do believe that. And you can see with the ailments that people come with, you can see, I ask in the first session, what are some of the things you're struggling with? And you can see it's tummy aches, it's this, it's that. So you already know how they're processing their emotions straight away. But eating right is critical, because what you're putting in your body, you're either poisoning your body or you help lifting it up. So it is going to play a massive role on whether you feel sluggish and whether you feel like you've got motivation and drive to do what you love to do. So it's going to play a role. Yeah.
And do you think there are exciting possibilities with psychedelics in treating depression?
I think there is a lot of research happening in that. I think it's also being abused to some degree, like anything in life.
Yes.
So I think there are some studies being done where in very scientific, controlled environments, they have seen some results that have been positive.
The John Hopkins study?
I haven't looked into that myself. My personal belief is that yes, it's there, and there's ayahuascas and there's all sorts of things. I don't personally feel, and the people that I follow and my mentors are similar minded, that it's necessary. I think it's a tool that can be utilized, and I think it has helped many people and whatnot, but it equally has also been quite destructive for some people if they're not in the right space. But I believe you don't actually need even those tools to get where you need to go. I think it is every single one of us have the possibility to access who we really are, authentically just the way we are, without any tools. But it's each one's journey, and for some people it is on their journey, and that's fine.
With your own process, did you start to identify your own patterns that would manifest in your life, people pleasing and so on? At what stage did you pick these up?
I think I've always been studying myself and trying to understand myself. But I think, when you're comfortable in life, kind of everything's working, you just stay as you are. Until life gives you a big wake-up call and a big clap on the back of the head. And that's when you start really looking at yourself carefully. And I think my wake-up call came when I got sick. And when I had cancer, and I really had to re-look at my life very carefully and who I think I am and how I'm being, and very much being the good girl and the people pleaser and wanting to conform to what everyone else needed me to be so that I was safe, And when life throws you a hard knock, you really take a step back and you go, actually, this doesn't work for me. And having to really just be your authentic self, and you're able to shed some of the stuff you've picked up as a little person in your programming years. So life will get you there, whether you want to or not.
Do you think, deep philosophical question, do you feel that the cancer was caused by energetic disruptance?
I think the cancer, and it's for me personally, was a very big gift. As much as it was a hectic experience, and I wouldn't want to, touch wood, go through it again. For me, I think it's because energy follows the path of least resistance. So it's going to be the thing that's going to get your attention. Okay, and it messed up my sense of control. I was quite a controlled person, and everything's orderly and control. Messed everything up for me. So I think it came in a way that I had the whispers before. I remember racing around trying to be super mom, trying to do everything, and my heart pounding in my chest and thinking, I'm going to have a heart attack before I'm 40 if I carry on like this. But you ignore it and you carry on. Okay, it wasn't a heart attack, it was cancer, but it was still that wake-up call that had to say, like, hey, stop. Something had to grab me, and literally bring me to my knees and stop, because I wasn't listening. And I think we all can relate, is that often we get those little quiet whispers and we ignore it until it really gets you on your knees.
So let's go through that journey when you were at that stage and you felt you were at maybe rock bottom or whatever it was. What was your process afterwards to discover your path?
Okay, so just to put you in the scene, I had a full practice already. I had just given birth to my fourth son. So we also had just bought a big house. It needed renovating. And of course, I'm doing everything. And now I'm going to also renovate. So I'm juggling the 4 kids, just giving birth, wanting to renovate, and running a practice. So life is like full throttle. And then obviously with that diagnosis, everything stops. So now you're sitting in treatment with 6 surgeries. You're bald. You're going through chemo. So in that moment, I had to stop, but I didn't feel rock bottom, as you said it, which was interesting. I didn't feel that. I felt this feeling of I'm at a juncture. There's a very powerful juncture, and I can go left or I can go right. You know what I mean? And I chose to see it as a wonderful opportunity for me. And I said, flip, I'm going to sail through this, and this is going to help not just me but many others. That's what I want for this, you know. So I just started paying attention, and I was reading a lot. I've always read a lot, but I was really reading and trying to gain as much information as I could about the body and about the mind and about this journey and who am I really if I'm not this little Dominique that I think I am. And now I'm being stripped of all the things that even makes me a girl, because I had a mastectomy and I had no hair and I didn't even look like myself anymore. It gave me a blank canvas to start saying, well, then who am I? And that's kind of the journey I went on.
It's such a beautiful way to look at it, because I think many people would look at it with such negativity, but you looked at it as an opportunity, as a gift. And the positive energy associated with those emotions and that attitude probably carried you so far.
Yeah. Interesting enough, just a little side story was at the day that I got diagnosed, I was still in my rut of needing to work really, really hard and do everything excessively. I went straight back to work, which is bizarre. I mean, you don't get a huge diagnosis like that and go straight back to work, but I did. And I was in the hospital treating a patient, and patient was in a hospital, and they make stuff in art, and she brought this gift for me that she had made, and on it was a little quote, and she had no idea what I was going through. On the quote it said, "It's not the water around the ship that sinks the ship, it's the water that you let in." And I was like, and that quote has kind of been the quote that's helped sail me through this whole journey, is that I realized I had a decision. Like, it's what I let in that's going to determine if I sink. It's not the turbulence on the outside. So that, for me, was profound,
Okay. So, over the years, in practice and with your experience, you identified common triggers and problems persisting with patients that led you to writing your book. So, what are these commonalities that you found?
I just kept watching patients coming in, day out, struggling with similar things. We're all actually the same at the end of the day. Everybody just wants to be happy. They want to have nice things. They want to have a nice, maybe someone that they love, some sort of companionship of some kind. And you just saw day in, day out people struggling, you know, and people fighting with life. And I just thought there's certain fundamental rules, like you just said, an attitude towards life, a frequency issue, this, that I just thought, people need to know this. Why do they not know this? This is sort of the studying. I'd done 3 years of intensive studying and reading, and I had written books that were like this thick, and my kids were always saying, what is all this writing you're doing? And I was just writing all the fundamental principles that through all the ages people have known that is so important for my journey. And I thought, if I could just condense this, you know, and share it with other people, they could also work through their struggle and not see it as a struggle, but rather see it as a wild adventure, you know. And if I could just share those tools with people, not really tools, those principles, they could also sail through, because life's going to keep going up and down. That's never going to stop. You're in the world of duality. That's a given. But if you can create strength within, doesn't matter how up and down it goes, you'll be centered and you'll be able to navigate any water. So it's not about trying to make life. I think my previous version of me, I was always reading, looking for the answer of how to make life easier. I think that's what I was, if I'm honest, what I was always reading, looking for. And then I got sort of the message that it's not going to get easier. Like, life isn't easy. It's not meant to be easy. It's going to have its ups and downs. It's going to throw you all over the show. But it's about building, realizing who you are, and realizing how strong you really are, connected to all that is. And it's that you'll be able to navigate no matter what happens.
It's building that inner resilience.
Inner strength,
Yeah. And the problems that people experience, many of these are developed during those early childhood years, this childhood programming?
Yeah, is that from basically the last trimester of pregnancy till about 7 or 8, is when it's almost like if you got a new iPhone or a laptop, that's when you're downloading all the programs that this computer is going to run, basically. So we kind of like that. We download all our programming and we develop our little personality, our little persona. of how we've learned, each one of us, to be safe in this world, our ego, basically. So your little persona is your little ego identity that you've started to sort of assess, how am I going to make it in this world? Do I need to be like really pleasing to people, or do I need to be really like whatever? And as you develop that, then you go into the world with this personality that we all each have our personality. And it's really a compensation for what you've learned in your programming years. So you've had certain bites, I call them bites, and you perceive them as venomous or deadly, and you've compensated by having some anti-venom, and your anti-venom is your personality things that you've picked up.
Coping strategies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then throughout life, as adults now, you're just the adult version with the anti-venom to everything. You know what I mean? So you will see whenever you get triggered in life, you really resort back to that little you. You actually start to, if it was a trauma in your teenage, you sound like that teenager version of you when you're being triggered, because it reminds you of that, or you sound like, and it's now growing you up to this point that you don't need to be stuck there anymore. And once people start doing that, the real you's there.
So those early years, it's obviously then very impactful depending on what environment you're in, the dynamic in your family, how your parents are, for example, because that informs your worldview. Yeah?
Absolutely. But in saying that, you also now don't have to become paranoid about trying to shelter our children from every little thing. Obviously, you try and cultivate the most healthiest, most balanced environment you can for your children. But even if you do, you still can't protect them from everything, because a child might be born prematurely. There's nothing the parents could have done to protect them. So there are certain wounds that have to happen that are necessary for your journey. So you almost have to come into this world having some sacred wounds, as they call it, where you forget. That's part of your forgetting process. So that it sets you up for the journey of now needing to override those things and realize who you are. So you don't really want to prevent your kids from anything ever happening to them. Whatever needs to happen is going to happen. It's obviously you just don't want to add to the pot unnecessarily. You don't need to. You know what I mean?
Do you think that as part of these coping strategies, we adopt cognitive biases during that phase, or we use them to protect our little reality?
Yeah, I think we do. I think to some degree there's an internal self-talk. You know what I mean? That cognitive dialogue that goes in order to protect ourselves.
Is that another one that comes to mind is the confirmation bias, that we would subconsciously seek information to confirm what we believe about the world, and not challenge our beliefs.
Yes. We're always looking for evidence to support our beliefs.
Yeah.
And then they say, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And sometimes you fight for your limitations. And that's one of the biggest challenges actually in therapy, is often patients will fight for their limitations.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you want to be right? Or would you rather break free of your limitations? Because if you fight for them, you get to keep them. And you actually don't want to keep them. You want to be free of them. But we are drawn to what's familiar and what we know. And having to let go of that opens us into this unknown realm.
It's very frightening.
Scary. Yeah. So I don't really like this, but at least I know how it goes. So you hang on to that, because now what? I'm just drifting in nothingness. But if you can reframe that, instead of this unknown that's scary, it's the unpredictable unknown, you rather see it as pure possibilities. It's like a blank canvas. You can paint anything on it, or you could see it as a white blank wall and you have no clue what to do next.
Is that more difficult to achieve with some people?
I think some people just don't want to, and they are comfortable in their, we call it circumstantial comfort, you know what I mean? Is that they're comfortable just there. And it's, do you want to get stuck in that? And for some people, that's the level of growth they want to achieve, and that's absolutely fine, you know? Or you can have that sort of divinity where you can go into the unknown and there's pure possibilities. But not everybody is ready for that. It doesn't mean they'll never get there, but if they're not, that's also okay.
Do you think, like on a societal level as well, we sabotage ourselves with certain anchors? So the idea that you must be married by a certain age, you must have kids by a certain age, and subconsciously we have this anchoring effect that we feel we need to
To keep us safe.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you can hear it when people use words like I should, I must get married by,
Yes.
I have to. Those are words that are all ego-based. And when you're using those words, I should, I must, I have to, it's really based on fear. It's not necessarily based on what you love and what you'd feel to do. It's more just a fear-based thing, and it's what's going to keep me safe. And fundamentally, it doesn't actually, So it's having the courage to say, my mind or my ego is telling me I should get married by whatever, 25, but I don't. But what is the truth for me? Because for everybody is different. And then really paying attention and asking, contemplating with yourself, what's in your heart? But not everybody, again, is ready to challenge that and to sit with that and really face yourself. But you are in a society where there is a lot of shoulds and musts, and it's just representative of the fear that's been passed down each generation. But I do think we're shifting as well.
And people, the things that hold back a lot of people, limiting beliefs and self-sabotage, how do these develop?
So a limiting belief comes at a time when you're little. So kids are little meaning makers, basically. So they have an event, let's say dad works a lot or is always away. They make up assumptions with the mind and the immaturity of a little person. They don't have a broad spectrum understanding of the world yet. It's very nucleus, just them and their parents and whatever. So everything they feel is about them, because that's their world. That's all they understand. So if, let's say, dad doesn't come home, on time, is always late for coming home, the child starts to make a little rule up. It must mean because and then they finish the sentence, I'm not good enough, or I don't matter. Can't possibly mean that he's got a lot of bills to pay and he has to work late, because they just don't have the maturity to understand that. So they make up this little rule at that time, I'm not good enough, and that's one of the highest leading limiting beliefs, actually. And it stems from the age of around 2 to 4, and it's normally father derived. Not that it's the father's fault. The father's just working, trying to provide for his family, and he never even had that intention. It could even be a wonderful father, but he's just not there a lot because of circumstances. But the child made up this little rule, and they made it up. But the problem is not even that. The problem is we think we saw it. When you think you saw something, it's very hard to believe you didn't.
Okay.
So if I say to you, well, where did you see it? You'll say, well, you didn't come home, and then, I was playing by myself, and then I went to bed, and he didn't kiss me goodnight, But where did you see it? You didn't. When you start to realize that you didn't actually see you're not good enough. Those are just words you put in your head. There's a realization. It's like I always say in therapy, when you're little, you think you saw Santa. So you believe in Santa. And I said, but how do you know you saw Santa? And you say, oh, there's presents and there's milk that he drank and da-da-da-da. But later on, when you get older, you drop that belief so easily. Why? Because you look back and say, but did I actually see Santa, or is there just evidence that made it look like Santa was real? And then could there be other reasons that there were presents under the tree? Maybe your parents bought them. Why was the milk drank? Maybe your brother drank it, or whatever, or your parents. And the same as with limiting beliefs, is that you made it up because there was enough evidence that made it seem as if that was a logical assumption, that you saw it, but you didn't see it. Then our job is to go and look back and say, but did you really see it? And then when you realize that you didn't, you're able to drop it. Because you don't have to try to not believe in Santa. You just don't, because you know that you didn't see him. You know what I mean? It's like obvious. So you don't have to work hard at dropping a limiting belief. When you realize that you made it up and you didn't actually see it, you drop it just like you dropped Santa.
So do you find if people get to that stage, there's an instant transformation?
I think...
At least in awareness.
I think there is a huge shift. I do, I really do. But it does have a way, the ego has a way of weaving itself back into the story. So it does require a little bit sometimes of just continuous of awareness, of noticing yourself when you start behaving in a manner that supports a certain belief. And sometimes it's habitual because you've done it for so long. And just being aware of yourself when you are going down that rabbit hole again. But in general, yes, that does sort it out.
With this concern, I'm not good enough. On some level, do people feel it but not necessarily put the words to it? So maybe they feel something is wrong, but they don't know how to actually identify that.
100%. And what they end up doing is blaming others. Because they can't put their finger on why they feel that, it's always because of my husband or my wife or my partner, and they blame it on everything around them, but they're not actually able to pinpoint why they feel this horrible feeling. So it must be everything around them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what we do in therapy is very important, is I help people go and pinpoint it, because it's very hard sometimes to see it yourself. You can't always put words to it, and there's certain questions and process we go through that helps a person really get to that core.
Yeah. So in that kind of process, would you lead them there and show them the area and hope they discover it, or would you point it out and say, you're doing this because you don't feel good about yourself or something?
I lead them there, but I don't need to point it out, because you see every
They'll
time.
make
It's
the
like
connection?
a light comes on, they're like, oh.
Yeah.
It's because, and they
The
get
light came on.
Yeah, switch your light on, and they just see it. It's so obvious in front of them.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
And it has to resonate with them, because it can't be anything I've told them. Any realization you have, if it doesn't resonate with you, if you don't have a direct experience with you, it's just information. Then it's just like you read it somewhere. So what? So for me, it's more important that a person has a direct experience with something in order to really, you only know something when you've really experienced it. You can know of something, but to really know it is because you've had a direct experience. So it's more about getting them to that experience.
Yeah. If we talk about people pleasing, so people pleasing would be, for example, sacrificing your own needs to make somebody else happy. And is this something also that you develop a habit in childhood?
Yeah, definitely. I do think it is. It's about keeping yourself safe. See, as a baby, we fundamentally know that we need love in order to survive. Because as a baby, you can't feed yourself, you can't change yourself. So you need someone to care for you, to look after yourself. So there's an instinctual thing going there, that you are seeking love and acceptance and avoiding rejection in order to stay safe. So the people pleasing comes from that instinctual need to, you figured out that if I just please people and do what they want, then they love me and accept me and they look after me. So you get into a habit of a lifetime of doing that. So
can it be predictive? If you understand someone's childhood, can you assess it and imagine that this is what they went through? They most likely will have people-pleasing tendencies?
Definitely. I think you can often look at a person's life now and you can almost predict what their childhood was kind of like, because it's almost the blueprint for how the house looks. Like you can almost imagine what the plans of a house look like if you're looking at the house. You know what I mean? It's easy to see because it's built upon that foundation.
So obviously with your background, you can see that. Does it take a lot of work for the patient to make these connections?
What do you mean by a lot of work? On their own?
On their own, or with help. When you're guiding them, can they see it when you point these connections out, or does it take like a lot of work and awareness?
I think anything worth getting there takes consistent focus and attention. I don't think it's a lot of work in the sense of efforting. It's not about efforting, but it's about willingness is the main thing for me. Is if you've got the will to do something, it doesn't feel like you're working hard at it, because you really feel passionate about where you're going. And as you start seeing the results in our working at it, you start getting excited about life is starting to feel different. So you just want to do it more. You know what I mean? You want to pay attention to yourself when you're starting to do that thing you do, you know, and it's worth it. So people, it's not an effortful journey, but it does take dedication.
But the willingness needs to be there.
Yeah.
I wonder if sometimes the willingness is sabotaged by the need to keep control of what's comfortable. Absolutely. Yeah. You'd be surprised how the comfort for familiarity trumps most things. Even though they're so unhappy, it still overrides what it takes, because the unknown is just so much scarier. Even if the unknown, and I say that even sometimes, what if I tell you the unknown on the other side is like, you like fairy tale land and it's amazing, and they're like, but there's no guarantees, Dominique. So just leave me where I am. I'm unhappy, but it's so familiar. It's so familiar, and I feel safe in the control of the unhappiness, you know. And what exactly is self-sabotaging? So self-sabotage is undoing yourself, really. And it takes, just wanted to add there, it takes a real fear, you know. It's not the element of not being scared. It's not that you go into this journey and you're not scared of the unknown. It's that you're willing to do it anyway. Do you understand? There's an element of vulnerability
and that's what courage is, it's having the fear despite the fear, of having a vulnerability and going into it. But we undo it, we self-sabotage ourselves with the fear of not knowing what's going to happen. So you'll go and do the thing you said you weren't going to do, or you'll go and make the same decisions because at least you know how that goes, or you undo it in some way.
Can you develop strategies in action to counteract your self-sabotage?
Definitely. I think, you see, in terms of, I just wanted to use an elastic band type of example. When you pull an elastic band, it's always going to, if you let go one side, it's going to go to the side that's holding tighter. Okay? So if your limiting beliefs are holding tighter, okay, the second it starts to get tighter in terms of going towards what you want, the tension buildup, okay, sometimes gets so tight that we self-sabotage in order to reduce the tension.
Okay.
But if the focus is more on where you're going, in other words, have the end in mind, you stop trying to self-sabotage because you're not focusing on the fears of it. You're focusing on the joy of the good feeling of where you're going. That even though you hit obstacles and there's still challenges, they don't derail you. You don't self-sabotage because despite the challenges, you're going there one way or another. And it ends up, you don't buckle under the pressure in that way. Almost the pressure helps project you forward. So the pressure can either pull you back or it can help catapult you forward. Depends on which side's holding tighter, the end in mind or the current limiting belief.
One of the things that I think is interesting to talk about, and sadly more common than we would like to believe, is abuse in relationships. And why do people stay in abusive relationships? Is it a low self-esteem thing?
Yeah, definitely. Well, one aspect is, again, the sense of control that we're talking about. Even though you're unhappy, at least it's predictable and you know how it goes. The other thing is that low self-esteem is because if I had to be in a healthier relationship or not in this relationship, I would fundamentally have to have a different core belief about myself, that I am good enough, or that I do matter, or whatever the belief is, that I am lovable. It's often that I'm not lovable. So the end in mind that we were talking about just now is a version of yourself that believes you are lovable. So now this version of yourself doesn't believe you're lovable. So even though you've got the idea that you want out or whatever, you're going to end up self-sabotaging and bringing yourself back into the unhealthy relationship because it matches your identity. Your identity of that you believe about yourself. So you literally have to let go of the idea of who you think you are in order to get out of that relationship. And sometimes that requires a little bit of extra help, and doing it by yourself, it's easy to go back into old habits.
And people sometimes reframe what happened to try and, I suppose, to rationalize and justify. Is this also just to maintain a comfort
Absolutely,
zone?
Yeah, to fit the story, right?
Yeah.
Because it needs to fit the story. So you're going to justify or rationalize it in a certain way so that it fits your story. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense what you're doing. So it has to almost seem justifiable to yourself that that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It makes sense. It's because of the kids or because of finance or because of whatever. So you
only did it once. You wouldn't do it again.
Exactly.
That kind of
because
thing.
you also want to believe that, because fundamentally then it solves your problem and you don't have to take that giant leap of faith.
Yeah. There's do you read anything by Robert Greene?
No.
He's a fascinating author, and he writes about a lot of human nature. Well, the book is actually The Laws of Human Nature, but it's very interesting. And he suggests that when people have these outbursts, it's in those moments when you see true character, and people reveal who they actually are, because conventionally we all wear masks, and he says we wear a certain mask because we want to be perceived a certain way. We want people to sort of see this version of us that we want to present, but under this extreme pressure the true nature comes out. Do you think there's truth to that?
I do. I think the truth comes out in terms of who you are up to this point. I don't think it's in your entirety. I think, so let's say under a lot of pressure you start cracking and you start to become angry or whatever. I don't think angry is who you really are in that sense. I think it's just the truth of how you really feel comes out in terms of you just been masking all this anger and suppressing it inside. But I don't believe you're an angry person per se. I just think you start to let out your true sort of actual feelings. But within that is the truth of who you are, which is divinity itself. And then it allows you from that point to now really work through that anger, and instead of masking and suppressing it and being an edited version of yourself with this mask on, to really then transcend that anger and get to the other side of who you really are, which is love itself.
Okay. And the common things that hold people back, like the limiting beliefs, the self-sabotage, and so on, are there cases where these can be exacerbated with extreme trauma, or does that cause other dimensions?
When you say extreme trauma, you mean like if there was a robbery or...
Yeah, I mean any kind of extreme event, so like a sudden death or like extreme abuse or rape or these kinds of extreme.
I think people and circumstances, as Peter Crone says, it will always show you where you're stuck. So it will reveal to you where you're stuck. So those extreme traumas are going to show you where you're stuck. In other words, it will reveal to you more of what you believe. So if you believed you were not lovable, and let's say you lost someone, and you go through massive trauma and you're struggling to cope with it, it'll show you fundamentally there's a belief there that you believe about yourself. So in other words, it's highlighted.
It amplifies.
It amplifies on steroids, So I don't necessarily think that the trauma creates it. I think the trauma just reveals to you more of what's been hidden or what you're kind of getting away with your compensation tendency. So to me, the trauma is as horrible as it is, but the trauma is an opportunity really to face the truth of who you are. If your whole life have been getting away with believing you're not lovable, and now you lose someone that you love, as awful as that is, it sends you into this darkness, but it's also an opportunity to come to the light. In other words, for the rest of your life, if you place your attention on the truth that you are lovable and you're not abandoned in the way you've always felt, it's a whole lifetime of a different version of you, but more the highest version of yourself. So it was never there to sink you, the trauma. It was really there to shake off the nonsense that you've picked up and live yourself,
That's, I suppose, with some of those extreme traumas, people need maybe a bit of time to reach that point.
Because there's first the integrity of the trauma.
Yes.
You still have to respect the emotional roller coaster of such a severe event, is that person still has to deal with the practicalities of actually that loss or that. So it's still have integrity for that and compassion for that. But then beyond that lies opportunity.
And how does the early programming in childhood and the family dynamic influence attachment styles in relationships?
Well, it depends on the assumption the child made. So remember, you can get 4 kids from the same family and have totally different attachment styles. Nothing to do with necessarily the parenting, because it was similar parenting for all of the kids. But it's the assumption the kid made, the meaning that child made about that develops their attachment styles. They either got an insecure attachment style or avoidant or whatever, based on what they made it mean about themselves. So it's the environment.
Highly individualized.
The environment's the stage, but it's still up to you what you make of it.
It really is fascinating, though. It's like you say, you can have so many different stories come from one environment.
Exactly. I mean, you interview a family of a whole lot of kids, and each one has such a different take on their childhood.
Different story.
One is complaining
really
about things that others thought was amazing.
Okay. So, taking all of these things into context and all this background, you were inspired to write your book. And your purpose behind this book is to heal people?
Not really to heal, but to awaken people, to remind them of who they really are. So it's more of a kind of a torch shining in direction and helping people remember. So that's really what it is to share a gift of what I remembered and realized going through my journey, and wanting to share that with others as everybody goes through their journey. And there was a time and a place when I was, so it took about 3 years to go through this whole journey of the book, but in part of it I was writing when I was going through the cancer. And there was a moment when I thought, sure, I'm going to get a port put in my neck and it's right like through your, main artery and whatever. I just thought, I really need to put stuff on paper that if anything did happen to me, that my kids, one was just a tiny baby of 3 months old, 4 months old, that there's a message. Like, what would I want my children to know about life that I thought would be a guiding force for the rest of their lives, or some fundamental things? And whether it be my children, whether it be patients, or whether it be people, is what could I share that I've learned up to this point that for me is fundamental. So there's a personal aspect to it of wanting to share.
It's your legacy.
Yeah, gifting my children, if I'm not here as they're growing up, to say, listen, pay attention to this in life. Or to other people out there. That sort of, it was like I was writing it. I used to write every night till like midnight, but I was writing it with like love, as if I was talking to my kids grown up. And that's the kind of love you want to give to anybody, because it's the deepest kind of love.
One of the things I found fascinating was the frequency of emotions. And you have the chart in the book, I think it's the Hawkins scale of consciousness, with different frequencies. Can you talk us through that a bit?
Absolutely. That was also a part for me that I was like, didn't realize that we have different frequencies. I didn't realize that even emotions carry different frequencies, and you get lower frequencies and higher frequencies. I just thought you have good emotions and bad emotions, and realized there's no good emotion or bad emotion. They just have a different feeling to them, just like a musical note has a high note and a low note, but there's no good note or bad note. And they just feel differently, and some sound different in your ear, So when I realized that and put sort of the idea of music and frequency and emotions together, and that's why music also evokes so much emotion, because it's a frequency. But the ego itself has normally lower frequency emotions. When we're very ego-based, which is pride, anger, all those emotions, they lower down on the spectrum. Our true nature, before we come into this body, if you want to say, we are high frequency light energy. Okay, so they call that 500 hertz and above. Okay, then you come into this body, and we call it the pain body, and then there's emotion attached, and it's a lower frequency. But you have the ability, you're an antenna really, you can place your attention on anything. So although there might be negativity and you're aware of the negativity, what you might see the negativity, but what you focus on is not necessarily that. So you can zoom in on something, and that creates a certain emotion in you. So you can actually choose what frequency you're at, and people don't realize that. They think because it's so horrible outside and because so much stuff is going on, therefore they are a product of whatever's going on. And that's not the case. Once I realized that even though things are going on outside that we may not like, you still can focus on whatever you want. And when you focus on what you want, your frequency can go up. There's people in prison cells, that concentration camps, if you read Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about that, where he says, I was on a beautiful island while I'm sitting in a terrible, most worst circumstances known to man. So that's the truth, is that you can really bring your frequency up despite your circumstance, not only if your circumstances are fine, then you are. And as you raise your vibration up to who you really are, remember you actually are a high frequency vibration, the thing is your thoughts is what brings you back down. Is that when you have thoughts that then are attached to a low frequency vibration, you bring yourself down. But you have the ability to now focus your thoughts where you want.
It's interesting you mentioned music. And music can resonate with different emotions because they're frequencies. And it's so obvious as a musician, because if you play, for example, a major chord, it sounds happy, it resonates with something joyous. And if you play something minor or diminished, you'll feel sadness.
It's constricted.
Yeah. And I think a lot of music, at least that I love, connected with me because it had this element of sadness, and was written in a minor key, but it hits you deeper. It cuts in and you feel it. And it's like you say, it's all frequency, it's sound, it's energy.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. You mention in the book about the biochemistry of emotions, and I think that's fascinating because certain emotions correlate with certain hormones in your body. So how how can people impact that?
Yeah. So for my journey, what was very interesting was to link the two, that I didn't understand that when you're in a constant adrenal spike, in other words, if you're interpreting the world as stressful, even though I was having fun, I loved everything I was doing. I loved running around, looking after my kids and running a practice and there was still a sense of urgency behind it. So there was a feeling behind, which was actually the problem, not what I was doing. What I was doing was fine. It was what was behind it. It was the doing part of it. It was the I must, I should, I can't be late, So when you're having that type of urgency, you're sending a neurological signal to your body, and that your nervous system is on edge. So you're pumping so much noradrenaline, adrenaline, and those hormones around your body because you're constantly in a fight or flight, as if there's a saber-toothed tiger chasing you. So there's that prehistoric sort of survival instinct. That's meant to spike when there is an actual danger, a tiger, and you need to run. But now this is chronic. Now this is all day I'm running around as if there's a tiger chasing me.
So you're just staying in that sympathetic state.
In that constant adrenal spike until you get adrenal fatigue. And that's where all your autoimmune diseases, cancers and things come in, because there's constant inflammation. So your body is not designed to be in a constant adrenal spike. It's supposed to do it and drop, every now and again. You're not meant to be dying all the time. So if you're constantly doing that, and it's like driving a car in first gear on the highway the whole way to Joburg, it's going to burn out. It's not supposed to do that. So when I linked that and now understood that, the biochemistry of that, then I saw how I'm making the connection to my body, because I couldn't understand that. I'm so healthy. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I exercise, I eat great. I was like, the doctors kept saying, you're the epitome of health. Like, they couldn't understand it. It didn't make sense, Now it makes total sense, because it was a hormone-driven cancer. Makes total sense. And she even said, you've got such a high drive, like your adrenaline is just going all the time. And obviously I'm going to be the perfect candidate then to get sick, you know. So when you see that, then you're like, okay, so I just need to change gears, basically.
Rein it in a little.
Rein it in and stop perceiving life with the urgency of I should, I must, I have to. And just what do I feel to do? And be in the moment rather than do the moment. That was the biggest shift for me.
Do you think for you at the time, and maybe with many people, there's an addiction to busyness?
Absolutely.
To want to do as much as possible all the time?
Yeah. I think there's an addiction to busyness or avoiding the self. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then
it's two sides of the same coin, really.
Exactly. So that's a hard question we all have to ask ourselves. What are you trying to avoid? And one of my mentors asked me that at a point. I was like, I don't know. What am I trying to avoid? Because I didn't I didn't feel I was trying to avoid anything, but clearly I was. And what are you trying not to see? And really it's seeing who you really are. Is that you've got to face who you really are. And for me, that's a much bigger version. There's the two selves, there's the self with a capital S and the little you. And you're so used to and familiarized with your little self that you're busying your life in that. But if you stop, you have to recognize there's something much bigger than you, and now you've got to trust that and let go of the steering wheel for a little bit, and that can be super overwhelming.
Well, let's talk about that and how people can make that connection, because you talk about the conscious mind and the subconscious, source and you, source and persona.
Yeah. Okay, so source, if we want to say non-physical, all that is. Now, whether you call it the universe, the cosmos, God, whatever you want to call it, is a divine energy. Okay?
This is just universal
energy. So before you came into this world, there's this one universal energy, and then you come into individual little people. Okay, and you've got this little meat suit and a little a name, and your little name that you call yourself. But that's not really who you are, Like I could have called me Cindy or whatever. That's just the name I go by, and this is just the body that I'm inhabiting. You know what I mean? But who I really am is that consciousness, that awareness that knows that she's here. That if I place my attention on my right big toe, I'm there, and then I'm back here. You know what I mean? So it's that consciousness, that's actually who you are. The rest is just the Tupperware, and it's about learning that I always thought before that time that who you are is the person that you see in the mirror. Like, I was quite a practical scientific person. I did my undergrad and BSc, so I didn't get that there's, like, I knew maybe there's a God or something bigger than us, but I didn't struggle to connect the two. And when I started to realize that that's not really who I am, this is just an accumulation of who I've become. In other words, as Sadhguru says, imagine you are cells that have accumulated, started as 1, 2, and grew, and you ate a whole lot of food, and it kept going up and up until you've got this little person. If you stopped eating, and you've accumulation of cells and food, it would go back down into the ground. So you're an accumulation of thoughts, beliefs, ideas, cells, and that collection is just who you are up to this point, but it's not really who you are. And when you can see that you're actually the consciousness inhabiting this, that's who you are. No one can touch you. Your name can change. You can lose a limb. I realized that when I had started having all these surgeries and things, that I'm still me. No hair, no this, no that. I was still me. I still felt just as feminine, even though I didn't look very, like the same.
Yeah.
So the point is, when I had to have a direct experience that personally for me to really get it. But it's not, everybody can just get it if you start to see that that's not really who you are. Your thoughts are just an accumulation, your beliefs are accumulation up to this point, and who I am is the one aware of this experience. That's who I am, the awareness itself. Then your humanness becomes just that. It's fallible. It's okay. You're not so attached to this human element of you. And people might criticize you or have something to say about, so what? You're not going to be great at everything. You're going to make mistakes. That's called being human. But it's not who you are. So you don't even take it personally. You're quite comfortable with not being great at everything or making silly mistakes because you're just the consciousness, the witness, having this human experience. So your ego then is not so fragile because it can take some knocks and it's not who you are. You recognize the ego is there and you're the one witnessing.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite a departure from conventional clinical psychology because you're looking at things in a much broader context and that's quite refreshing.
Yeah. I think it is quite controversial because I think people come to psychologists expecting just to do maybe some formal assessments but it doesn't resonate with me and I can't do something that doesn't feel right to me. So that's why I've taken on so much studying in the background on my own in terms of really understanding things from a more holistic point of view and not just the mind, but mind, body, soul and putting the three together. And for me, it's really just speaking to a person from my heart to their heart, and you feel that resonance and then we're speaking the same language,
Do you find sometimes resistance from maybe very religious folk?
I think you've been trained to navigate those waters. You do respect people's religious programming or whatever they're coming in with, and I don't think anything is necessarily right or wrong. To me, it just is, and it's okay. That I'm open-minded enough to let people have their belief system. So it's not about pushing down anything on anybody's throat. It's just you'll go maybe navigate into an area that if the shoe fits, then run with it. And if it doesn't, leave it. And I'm quite comfortable with letting people try it on. And if it doesn't fit, we move on and we move away from that and we work where we're at. You always got to work where the person's at. It's not about me getting them to a point.
No, I think I meant more the resistance from people's point of view when they have a rigid belief system and this is something that seems
out there,
a little bit out there.
Yeah. Funnily enough, there are some cases, but very rarely have come into my space, and I think you attract like attracts like. So for some reason, the type of patients I've started to attract,
they resonate
because it's on the same frequency. I think you just do tend to attract a more scientific. If I had a more different approach, I think I would just generally have those type of patients showing up. Yeah.
All right. The idea of the subconscious mind and the conscious mind, it reminds me a little of, have you read Thinking Fast and Slow?
No.
Daniel Kahneman, and he talks about system 1 and system 2 in the mind, and I wondered if there were parallels, but it's more of an analytical way in which the mind works, which I just thought it was interesting.
So the subconscious mind is running the show most of the day, right? 95% of the day. Because the subconscious mind is sort of the memory bank. So you've downloaded all these programs, and then that's sort of what's set. The conscious mind is more the thinking mind. So most of the day, you don't need to think a lot. A lot of the things we do is repetitive. So when you're walking, talking, tying your shoelaces, you just do it. Because you're just so used to doing it. It's only when there's an interruption that you actually zoom in and focus. If your shoelace gets knotted, then you pay attention. So that's the hard part, is that most of our day is occupied or taken up by our subconscious mind, just running repetitive programming. And only until there's a glitch, there's an interruption, that we start paying attention and thinking with our conscious mind.
Okay. It's actually very similar because the thoughts in that book are quite the same. It talks about system 1 sort of runs as your general operating system most of the time, and then when you have to zoom in on the details, then system 2 comes in. So if if you're faced with something like a simple, like a multiplication problem or something, if you have 20 by 24, like your system 1 knows it's not going to be a 2-digit number, but it also knows it's not going to be like 10,000 or something like that. It automatically assesses that it falls within a range, but then the system 2 has to get involved to calculate and be specific and work out, okay, this is actually what it's going to be.
Yes, absolutely. So but to apply that to our everyday life is that as you start bringing more conscious awareness, in other words, paying attention to every moment, you slowly start building a program base that's automated, that fits the truth of who you are. So it becomes subconscious. In other words, you're now reprogramming, in a way, a new set of programs that actually fits more the truth of who you are. So then you're not consciously always having to think either, because that would be exhausting. But there's a period of time of reprogramming that is a bit more effort-filled. But then it does become automated, and it's just a way of, you just live it. It's just how you live. You start living from a place of trusting the process. You start living from a place of, expecting things always work out for you. Because that's kind of the downloads that you now have, as opposed to those fear downloads of...
The fear-based.
So then it actually starts to match now. Your life starts to look different, because now the recipe, if you want to call it that, is different. So you're baking a different life. You're following a different... You've upgraded the recipe. So the product that comes out, your life, looks different.
It looks different, One of the things that I thought was really interesting was that thoughts have an electrical charge and emotions have a magnetic frequency.
So thoughts, they say, have the electrical, which is to do with the brain and the neurons and whatever, but the heart has more of the magnetic pulse. So there's the electromagnetic field. It's together. It's heart and mind, and that's what Joe Dispenza talks a lot about. It's the heart-mind connection, and it's the two together that has the most powerful,
this electromagnetic
field. Because then that will attract things that resonate with that.
I was chatting about this actually in an earlier podcast with Jason, because we were talking about the electromagnetic sphere that we emit, and the idea was that perhaps the aura that some people can see and some people can't see, because they have mapped it, they have imaged this electromagnetic impulse that we generate, and it actually goes quite far out of our bodies. That's something interesting.
They say, though, that, I have no direct experience, but from what I've read and seen, that they say we come in to this lifetime already in an energetic field. In other words, with an aura of a collective karmic pool that you've inherited. So there's already an aura of a particular frequency, if you want to say that. But now in this lifetime, you have the opportunity to
change,
impact
or shift,
that. To shift.
Okay, no, that's it's interesting. What does it mean to be in alignment?
So for me, is to be in alignment with who you really are. So if we said the little Dominique, in other words, the person of who you are, is in alignment with your true self, your higher self, source, connected to all that is. So it's the conduit between the two. So you're having a human experience, a spiritual being having a human experience, is that, if you imagine like a pipe, if you had to put it like that, I really see it like that, like a pipe that's connecting who I am on this earth as this little person, connected to a divinity that's greater than myself, in an alignment with that it can flow to and through me, that I can be an expression of that divinity in everything I do with love. Whether I'm changing a dirty nappy or whether I'm treating a patient, you do everything with love. And that's in alignment with the truest, highest version of who I really am. So even if it's what I'm eating, it's in alignment with what's true about me.
So if you have this idea of this pipe and you're downloading and you have the energy, the things that get in the way are the things that we spoke about earlier, limiting beliefs, self-sabotage, people-pleasing, and so on. So we have to declutter and remove all of these and connect.
Yeah, so I see that, imagine that pipe like a hose pipe. And you've ever played with a hose pipe where you pinch it off like that? Yeah, the kinking it, so the flow never stops. The flow is always, the tap's always on, is how I see it. Electricity is always flowing. It's just, you pinch it off. So if you pinch it off with thoughts that are not true about you. So if you're having thoughts that you're not good enough, and if you saw a baby, I mean, a baby is a picture of perfection in that, if that's love itself. And if you looked at a baby, you never say it's not lovable, it's not good enough, it's insignificant, all those, you would never say that, right? So when you have thoughts that rest on those beliefs, you're pinching yourself off from the truth of who you really are. So you're going to get physically very uncomfortable, you're going to feel anxiety, you're going to feel things, and those are messages, neurological messages, and they say the nervous system is the link between you and your highest self. So the neurological message is trying to tell you, hey, you're busy focusing on a thought or belief right now that couldn't be more false about you. So we're making you very uncomfortable so that you stop pinching yourself off so that more can flow to and through you.
The 9 dimensions in life that you talk about are quite interesting, because I think many people don't have the awareness of these different spheres that need to be focused on for harmony. So do you want to run through those?
Yeah, actually, can I get to the picture of the house? I think it was.
Sure.
I just think it's nicely put out because for me, when you see it as a picture, you always remember it. And I put it as a house because it's the house of who we are. We reside in our life. And if you can get your house in order, you're in a good space. And that's kind of what we talked about. So we had our social life, obviously, our parenting, and they're not in any particular order. I just put them there. There's our parenting, if you're parenting or caring or nurturing something, career, financial life. There's our emotional life, our love and relationships, which always take a big portion, our health and fitness, our intellectual life, and obviously our spiritual life, which I put right at the top because it just signifies that. But those dimensions are kind of like what makes up our little home. We'll
put up a picture of it as well. We'll overlay it in the video so people can see.
Yeah, and if you can just put that, keep your house tidy, that's how I see it, is if you keep and how would you keep your house tidy in normal circumstances? You're going to put a little love and attention in every domain and in balance. You're also not going to only focus on one room and neglect all the other rooms. Your house is going to be a disaster. So it's putting love and attention in all areas in a balanced way.
Because blockages in one are going to affect everything else.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I love the way that you describe habits and beliefs as apps, that we've downloaded the wrong apps, or we have apps that are faulty and we need to remove these apps and install new apps. Because I think it's relatable. Everybody understands this now, especially with the advent of mobile phones. So
for me, when I was trying to put it in a concrete way that people would get it, I thought, what is like visual way that we could see this? And I just was with my phone on my desk, and I just thought, this is so true. Is often you think your phone is broken when it's glitching out, but it's not. The phone's not necessarily broken. It's that you get a new iPhone from the store and it's got nothing on it. It's kind of like that baby, and then you download and personalize it. And if I look at my phone, if I look at my son's phone or my husband's phone, they all got their own character. Their cases are different, their screens are different, and we all personalize it to fit us. You know what I mean? And the apps that suit us, so, but we have downloaded stuff that we didn't necessarily download, that has come from our parents or our whatever, our environment or our community, that don't really match who you are. And now, as the conscious, because you remember you are relying on your parents' consciousness when you're little. So as you get older, you have now developed your own consciousness, and that's why they say from about 7 or 8 you start to become conscious, and now you can really start putting what is the truth about you there. And you need to now re-look at some of those apps and beliefs and look at them and say, is that really true about me, or is that just what I've inherited? And then you can actually let some of those go. But the fear is you're not going to fit in your family now if you don't believe the same thing. So in this whole sorting out your cell phone, there's going to be an element of people are not used to you being like this now. So there's a little bit of resistance from the outside. But you've got to be willing to hang with the tension, like we talked earlier, because on the other side...
And resist the urge to people please to maintain that dynamic.
Exactly. But people will adjust. People will eventually catch up and realize this is actually who you are. And when it's authentic, it's like bees to honey. They will be okay. They will, adjust, and it'll all be fine because you are emitting a higher frequency of love in the version of yourself that you're being. So...
Okay. So assuming that you've removed the resistance, you've decluttered, you've removed those apps, you've installed the new apps, you've switched your light on in all your 9 rooms, and everything is going well, what are the good maintenance habits to keep this?
Yeah. So it's very important to ground yourself and to create space. So constantly, like we said, don't get too close to the story of your life. That's the screen. You're so close to the story that you lose yourself again in the story. And then you let the story tell you who you are. You got to create space. So go for walks on the beach. Do things that you love. It's so important to do things that you love, because when you're doing things that you love, you know one nowhere. In that moment when you're playing a piece of music, or for me dancing, whatever, you really forget who you are. You forget your name, you forget that you're a father or a mother, or you're just so present in that moment. And that presence is golden, because it keeps you on track with who you are on your journey, and you're not just trying to fulfill the character anymore. So I would say ground yourself, do things you love, and stay balanced. Do everything in balance.
Okay. And for people who would want to buy the book, where is it available? Okay,
so it is on Amazon for more international printing, but people in South Africa, you can buy it online and at Burble, www.burbalpics.com. And you can order, it's printed locally, which makes it a lot cheaper, and they deliver to you directly. Okay. It's also at Exclusive Books in Alushimo.
Okay. With the book, you're also conducting masterclasses, which is quite exciting. So maybe you want to tell us a bit about that?
So what I've done is, for some people, not everybody loves to read a lot or doesn't have time to read a lot. So what I've done is I've taken the core fundamental teachings or principles that I thought were pivotal to really have an impact on someone's life, and we filmed a 4-session masterclass. And I did it sort of in a setting with other people so that it feels like you're one of the audience members. And what it is it's online. It's at www.switchyourlighton.com, and you can go on and do the 4-session masterclass at your own pace. Ideally, it's recommended that you watch 1 video a week, so you do, and then you download a free workbook with it, and you can read it in conjunction with the book. So it's really split up into like the first video is the first 3 chapters of the book, second video, and so on. And then you can work through it in your own time at home and really get into the nitty-gritties, because I ask questions there, and the workbook has questions for self-reflection or to help you identify what are your limiting beliefs, what is the personality persona that you've developed from childhood, and helps you navigate so you can really see yourself. So I really put a mirror up and help you identify what it is you're missing. And you work through it, and you do 1 a week for 4 weeks. And that's the journey of the masterclass.
Okay.
So that's the self-study version. But if you're a company and you're wanting to do it, there's a different setup. If you have a company and you want, for example, your staff complement to go through this journey, then it's a 6-week program. And then they can do it there's a live session option where they watch the 4 sessions, but for once a week, every week, they watch the online version. And then they can sign up for live sessions, Q&As with me every week. So then for 6 weeks, we do that journey where I help coach them and work through their questions and answers and so forth. But that's a package for more of a group setting.
Okay. And just also for viewers involved with the Pencil Club, we'll hopefully be setting up the masterclasses.
Absolutely, a live
at this venue.
Yes, that'll be
that's
great.
Quite exciting.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that.
So this podcast is called the Peak Performance Life Podcast, about helping and inspiring people to live their life at the peak. How would you define the peak performance life?
I'd say the peak performance is really being as authentic as possible to me. Is that, are you really being, it's who you're being, is to me, is true success, is an expression of the highest version of love in whatever you're doing. So whether you're with your children, whether you're doing something, a hobby, or whether you're doing your career, to me, peak performance is it's an expansive expression of love. You're doing it with the highest amount of love possible. And that's success. It's not necessarily in a currency of any kind, but the currency of love is for me. So that, I think, is what peak performance is.
If there was one habit that anybody could cultivate to improve their performance, what would that be?
I would say, I want to say two, but I would say focus, because it does require focus. You got to zoom in, and the willingness is really have the will to do it. So you really got to know what you love, and then it doesn't matter what obstacles come, you mow over them. You just you're so focused on what you love that you just plow through all of it.
And if there was one habit that people should avoid that holds them back, what would that be?
Listening to the noise in your head. I think as you go on a journey, you're going to hit obstacles along the way. And if you let that noise in your head get louder than it should be, it's going to derail you. So if you can notice the noise, but not buy into it, not believe it so much. Just
get
let
stuck
it,
with it.
Let it drift to the background. It's okay, you don't have to fight with it or resist it, but just let it, notice it, I see you, and carry on. Stay focused, keep your eye on the ball, and not let that noise get louder and shift your attention onto that noise. Then it's game over. Because you always have those little doubts, those little fears, a little voice will come up, but it's far, it's there. But if you place your attention on it, it becomes loud and scary, and then you lose focus of what you were doing.
To maintain your direction and your momentum, regardless
Despite
of those distractions. Okay. We end every episode with either a quote or a poem with some interesting words that either resonate with the topic or the guest. And I found this one, which I thought is quite interesting. It's a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. Trust your feelings, but feelings are nothing final or original. Behind feelings there stand judgments and evaluations which we inherit in the form of inclinations, aversions. The inspiration born of a feeling is the grandchild of a judgment, and often of a false judgment, and in any event not a child of your own. To trust one's feelings means to give more obedience to one's grandfather and grandmother and their grandparents than to the gods which are in us, namely our reason and experience.
So beautiful.
I thought that
exactly
resonates with your book.
Absolutely. And even in my book, I quote a lot of, at the end, I think, I really got to a point at the end of this, like, even writing it, like this light space, and Mother Teresa kept coming up for me a lot. You know, and at the end, even she talks about you're a pencil in God's hand, and says you're not broken, you know. And I just think that resonates with everybody, is that sometimes life is tough and you're going through a hell of a lot and you feel so broken. And it's to remember that you're not, is that there's a divinity that's flowing through you, that you can create anything actually, but you got to follow what inspires you.
If people wanted to reach out and connect with you, what would be the best way for them to make contact?
So I'm at Sunningdale Medical Center. My private practice is there. My receptionist is there, and I can give you her number.
We can put it up.
And it's just to reach out to her. She's my right-hand person, and you can book through her.
Okay. Dominique, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Shame. Thank you so much.
It was wonderful.
It's been fun.
Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure.